Welcome to the WAIR Chats podcast, a series where we dive into the conversations surrounding all facets of e-commerce and the people working to make it a more sustainable and productive industry for all. My name is Greg Moore, founder and CEO of WAIR, and your host for today's podcast. As a shopper, you would never go into a store, buy a product, and then try it out at home. Yet e-commerce forces shoppers into this experience every day. Join us as Ben Davis, the founding CEO of TryNow, shares his vision for the future of e-commerce by allowing shoppers to try products before committing to a purchase. Hello, everyone, and welcome to WAIR Chats. I have with me today Ben Davis. He's the CEO and founder of TryNow, and we are super excited to learn a bit more about his journey, and also just talk about the balance of founder, CEO / life, and then also a bit about e-commerce enablement from the vendor side. So, Ben, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, Greg, thanks for having me. I feel like we are destined for this. Our two solutions are addressed at attacking and addressing the same problem, which is around size and fit and uncertainty. So excited to go deep and jam with you.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's funny. I think when we first started communicating with the team, it was kind of like, hey, I have a pretty clear understanding that TryNow is going to increase conversions, AOV, do all this really amazing stuff, but it's likely to increase returns with it.
Yeah.
And then I was like, but the integration of WAIR with that customer experience then mitigates those returns, so you get to experience all of the upsides of TryNow.
Yeah.
And I think that was like my outbound pitch to your team to have some initial conversations, which has been awesome. You've built such an amazing team, and I'm really just excited to work with them. They've been really great so far.
Yeah, they've all shared the exact same about all of you.
Cool. So I'd love to kind of get the why behind the why and the man behind the business at first. I'd love to learn a little bit more about your background in life before you started TryNow, and then transition that into the founding of the company in a sense.
Yeah. So I'm a bit of a finance reject. I was in finance for the first handful of first part of my career, and ultimately I was in the investing world, private equity, venture capital, wanted to get closer to the operating side of businesses, and went to go work for someone who was starting an apparel business. And so I was launching the business, and in the process of doing so, I wanted to offer a try before you buy program to just get our products into more people's homes. Right? Great products, really soft materials, but it is impossible to experience a product through a browser window. So we figured if we can allow shoppers to try it at home before they have to commit to Bing, we'd increase conversion rates, we'd drive an LTV. And so just had this kind of moment where I said, well, e-commerce is completely backwards. We're forcing someone to pay and to part with their money just to experience our product. And if they don't like it, they send a return, and then we wait another 7 business days or so for them to get their money back. And kind of had this moment where it seemed it was just completely backwards. If e-commerce was started today in 2022, all of e-commerce would be tried before you buy, just like it is in brick and mortar stores. But back in 1995, we just didn't have the payment technology to enable that. So that was the genesis. Built TryNow. At the time, it wasn't called TryNow. It wasn't called anything. But built this functionality for myself, and realized a lot of other brands needed it.
How was that conversation to split off TryNow from the brand that you were building it with to then go start your own company? Like that could be a challenge in and of itself right there. How'd you navigate that?
Yeah, well, so the brand was run by Jacqueline Sachs, and her husband is David Sachs. He's the founding CEO of PayPal, founder of Yammer, and a bunch of other big software companies. And he runs Craft Ventures. So Craft Ventures was our first check, an investment, cool. And a pre-seed investment. And they're our largest investor. So they own the largest amount. So we've been partnering with them for I guess 3.5 years or so now.
That's a very fortunate team to work with in a sense, to be able to spin that off so quickly and just basically come out with venture capital. That's really cool. Yeah, I listened to their All In podcast, which I think is great. And Chamath, and they talk through, and Jason, they talk through all sorts of crazy stuff, which is cool. Including Chamath's sweaters. That's always my favorite topic.
What about the Sultan of Science, David Friedberg?
There it is. That's right. No, it's good stuff. It's funny. That was actually one of the first podcasts I ever listened to. And so you get these guys on there that are just, they have so many conversations day in and day out with such creative, really interesting people. And they bring all that to the forefront of the podcast. I thought it was really cool, and it's one of the transitions to us taking it to this podcast here. But it's cool that you have such a tight connection with him. How has that relationship, if any, transitioned what TryNow has become? Do they take a relatively passive approach to that investment strategy, letting you run it, or is there a balance between sort of where they have a desire for this to go versus where you do?
Yeah, I mean, so I came from the investing world, and frankly therefore have seen a lot of what happens after board meetings, behind closed doors, in
Mm,
conversations at investment funds, and so I was very careful about the investors that I wanted to bring on. Um, in general, when you're building a business, is being very cognizant of the people you bring onto your team or your cap table in any capacity, which are both employees and investors. And you just want to build a world-class team, which includes world-class partners and investors. And we're incredibly fortunate to have people who are very impactful, truly value added. Um, and of course, like have capital to help fuel the business. So
sure.
we've raised about 24 million in funding from a variety of investors, Craft Ventures, Sci-Fi Ventures, which is Max Levchin of the firm, and then Shine Capital. And Mo Koifman is one of the greatest board
Mhm.
members we could ever ask for. So certainly, I would say passive, probably like passive in the sense that they allow us to run our business the way that we feel is best for our business and for our stakeholders, merchants, shoppers, and investors and employees, of course. So there's freedom there, but at the same time,
Yeah.
like we have folks that really can see around some corners for us, which has been very valuable.
No, that's awesome. I think having that experience invested on the cap table where they have a vested interest in helping you see around those corners is something that's not common, not as common as I thought, but is amazing at the end of the day. So it's very cool. So I want to take a step back. So when you're like, you have this idea, you're about to split off from the company to start building the technology. How did you think about your first couple hires? Like, what were you thinking about? Like, here's exactly what I need to go from 0 to 1, right? Like, in Peter Thiel's famous book. Like, how did you get to that point, and then how did you validate that those were some of the right decisions to make at that time?
Yeah, yeah. So in the beginning, in the early days, we needed to build tech, and I am not technical, right? So like the first piece there was we need to build out an engineering team to bring this product to life. In the beginning, it was
Mm,
very, very scrappy. This was pre-funding, pre-seed funding. It was with my own money, and it was built with contractors. And so we got a product out there just to validate, does this model work? Like, does this drive growth? Right? We had a lot of conviction and then a hypothesis, but it was at the time was just a hypothesis that if you allow
mm,
shoppers to try a home, you're going to increase conversion rates, increase AOV, increase LTV. But we wanted to prove that out with some data, and we did. But that platform got pulled into the market incredibly quickly. We had a tremendous amount of demand, more demand
yeah,
than we kind of anticipated. And so the platform didn't have testing built into it. It wasn't, it by no means was bulletproof. And it was before funding, so we didn't have, we didn't have the capital to really build out that team.
right.
But the hypothesis was very much validated, and so we raised funding on the backs of that, and we built out a world class engineering team. That was kind of the start, and then I think the common advice is to hire for people for areas that you're weak in, and I think that's completely true. I do have like a bit of a contrarian
Mm,
perspective on it, which is like you certainly need like if there's a deficiency in your skill set, yes, you certainly need to hire for that. Like I'm not the most process driven person, so definitely knew that as I build up the team, I needed to surround myself with people that are incredibly process driven. You met Claire, right, Greg,
mhm.
and Claire is as process driven as they
Yep,
come.
that's true.
But so like that's all true, but I think like so, an advice that an advisor gave me is hire for someone that is a strength of yours, so that you can get some leverage. So someone that is really for me, one of my first hires was someone named Ryan Abramson, our VP of Sales. He's an incredible
Yeah.
seller, and I felt I had confidence giving him that part of the business and allowed me to go focus more on product, and then over time, kind of built out each of those functions.
Makes a ton of sense. It's funny. I will say we actually fell on our face with that early on, right? I think that we thought that our product was this is 2 or 3 years ago, but we thought our
Hmm.
product was more stable than it was. And so we
Hmm.
went to market, we hired a sales team, we got some real experience on the team. And then we found out that like we had no brand, we had like the product had holes in onboarding and all this stuff. And so we had to really quickly change the structure of our team to focus on the holes that we needed because I don't think we really took enough time to really understand
Yeah.
exactly what we needed there. So
Yes,
having that
I
forethought to go the first time is amazing.
completely can relate, right? We had a similar thing, which is, I think if I look back on it, there is a conflation between product market fit and concept market fit.
Mm,
And getting concept market fit can oftentimes look like product market fit, but like you said, holds and onboarding, things like that. That's the program at large. There's the product, there's the program, just kind of overall kind of going how you go to market. So I'm with you.
yeah, yeah, it's funny. I do a fair amount of mentorship for early stage startups, especially just like I just love that spot, right? You have this like
Yeah,
raw talent, raw problem, raw vision, and it's kind of like how do I help this entrepreneur craft what they need to do just to get to the next step.
yeah,
And a part of that, we were talking exactly about concept market fit versus product market fit, right?
hmm,
Whereas what I see a lot of entrepreneurs want to do is they'll have their problem statement, they'll have their potential solution they want to solve, they'll go talk to their friends. They'll go talk to people that are really going to be quite supportive in that are going to give them that, I don't want to say false, but it's a sense of security in a sense, right? And then it's like full bore onto this strategy.
yeah,
And instead of talking to a wider net of people, both detractors and attractors towards the vision to truly understand what is needed.
yeah,
Yeah, we were just talking about the variation of that. And then how do you look at getting objective data in the really, really early stages to prove that the vision behind what you're trying to build is the appropriate path. So
yeah.
yeah, it hits home. It's hard to do. In that sense, I mean, you guys had the forethought to get the product out there as an MVP, to get the data. Did you know in the really early stages exactly what KPIs you needed to attract and to get to in order for your company to take the next steps? Or was it a bit nebulous at first and you kind of had to figure that out as you were going?
It started with my own dollars that I put into it, and the product kind of just moved really quickly. And so I think like from that perspective, the product got pulled in, and so like the KPIs for us in order to to raise additional funding was kind of that $1 million in ARR kind of threshold, and we got there in quite quickly in like kind of 6 months or so from
Mm,
the product launch. And so we had to rebuild the platform from the ground
yeah.
up to ready ourselves for scale. And so that was kind of one piece from a fundraising perspective. But I think the KPIs on the product perspective is this driving value for merchants? Are the unit economics healthy for brands, right? And so ultimately we increase return rates. And so we drive more return costs, more shipping costs. And are the dollars flowing in, reducing customer acquisition costs, increase in LTV, and if you're an apparel brand, potentially an increase in AOV after returns, which many of our apparel brands see significant AOV increases.
Hmm.
Are the dollars flowing in more than offsetting the dollars flowing out? And they do. But there's always kind of optimizations around that, particularly around kind of different verticals or different ways that brands go to market, or depending on around their goals, whether they're using this for kind of acquisition strategies, LTV, kind of retention strategies.
Makes a ton of sense. It's funny. I think I was actually speaking with Claire several days ago, and we were talking about that type of the returns challenge, right?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, she made a kind of a funny statement. She's like, the best way to get to zero returns is to have zero sales. And I was like, oh man, I obviously I've just never really thought of it that way. But it really made me think like we get a lot of inbound opportunity, and the VP e-commerce or whoever it may be that we're talking to is focused on one thing, right? It's I want to reduce returns, or I want to increase conversion, or I want a better shopping experience.
Yeah.
And it feels like there's always this like one thing that they want, but at the end of the day, if your solution doesn't offer that one thing, then it's sort of like that's not on my roadmap right now. But
Yeah.
at the end of the
Yeah.
day, you're like, yeah, but we're creating more profitability for you and your site. How
Yeah.
do you guys communicate around that in a sense?
Yeah. So I mean, it depends on like every company is organized differently, right? And in some cases, companies organize people around like a metric that they own, like one single metric.
Mm,
The reality, I think, the challenge with doing that is every metric is related, right? So if you're only managing one metric and then all those owners of metrics are going to be at odds with one another because there's a push and pull with each one in order to optimize the overall unit economic model. And the way that we think about unit economics is pretty holistically, right? And like money is fungible, right? So if you move money from your left pocket to the right pocket, you still have the same money in your pockets. And so we think about the unit economic model the exact same way. So if we can increase gross AOV, now all of a sudden you can increase return rates. But historically, return rates going up is a bad thing for brands because if AOV and CAC are fixed, which historically they're very stubborn metrics to move, but if they're fixed and return rates go up, then you just by definition have less money per order. But if you can unlock AOV and you can unlock conversion rates and you can reduce the discount rate because those try before you buy cards are $0 anyways, all of a sudden you can move things around and you can end up with more money in your pockets. Some money moves from your left and right, but then you also ultimately have more money in your pockets at the end of that transaction, at the end of that order. So that's how we think about it expansively. We're seeing a lot with some brands who are thinking about charging restocking fees or changing shipping thresholds and things like that, right? So it's another way to kind of move money around. And if you didn't want to offer restocking fees, the other thing that you can do is increase the price of your products by $2 or something along those lines, right? So there's always levers that you can pull.
Totally. Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of the larger marketplaces really start to look into the returns charging models and things like that. I think there's, it's probably one of those things. There's a few bad actors that are really making it bad for a lot of other people. But at the same time, it is a challenge, and I know there's a fair amount of cost that goes into that. How does that transition? Let's assume, I don't know that it will because of Amazon, and I don't necessarily see Amazon going that way. But let's just like fantasy here, that returns and restocking fees do start to become more the norm in the D2C world.
Yeah.
Like, how does that affect you guys, and how do you navigate around it?
Well, let's make some predictions, and let's circle back in 5 years, Greg. So for us, like, we're compatible. We have brands that offer restocking fees. We have brands that don't, and most of our brands don't. So from our perspective, it doesn't really impact things much. I mean, there's a little bit of a higher bar that the shopper needs to chin. So if anything, if they're going to have to pay a restocking fee for returns, well, they might as well fill their cart with a bunch of items so that they can ensure that they find something that they like. And so we're compatible either way. I don't see restocking fees becoming the norm across e-commerce because the gravitational force that Amazon has on setting consumer expectations just puts a stake in the ground that is a unfriendly thing to do for the customer, and therefore Amazon will never move. And if they're about half of the market, well, then the other half needs to maintain parity, feature parity, and parity to some extent. Maybe you're not going to get your packages shipped as quickly, but at least it'll be free or free with a threshold. So I think it makes some sense for some brands, particularly areas where there's a lot of abuse from some shoppers. But I'd be very surprised if that becomes the norm.
Yeah, I tend to think the exact same way. I mean, you have the $1 million gorilla over there in Amazon, and everybody else is keeping up. And so if you create friction in the shopping journey in your D2C store, there's then going to be pressure for the wholesale side to pick up, which reduces your margins, and then for you to sell on Amazon such that you don't take on the liability.
Yeah.
And in either case, like, you're essentially hurting your bottom line as a brand if you go that way. So I totally agree with that.
It's like, if you boil it down to the first principles, well, why are people returning at high rates? There's like a bunch of reasons. And I think, like, I view restocking fees as a very blunt tool at saying, okay, there's a bunch of reasons why people are returning at higher rates. So let's just throw some money at it. And I don't think financial friction is the right way to solve most problems. But it could be because the product's not as is expected in reality. It could be because you need to do a lot more to your site, on-site experience, to educate shoppers, so like using WAIR to understand how these different products fit. Or in addition to saying this model is 5'6", wearing a size medium, other things like that, to improve that on-site experience. improving your sizing on your product itself. And then maybe you have some lower intent shoppers, or maybe you have shoppers that just didn't try enough sizes or enough styles to find the right fit the first time.
Mm,
It's
right.
like the way we think about it is like the fitting room analogy. If Greg, what's your brand you like?
I'm wearing Fresh Clean Tees and Legends, so I feel like I got to go with them right now.
Oh, great. Let's use Legends because it's a mutual customer.
There it is.
Um, and fantastic products. So let's say you go into a store and there's Legends
Mhm.
at that store, and you want to try on a few different the Luca shorts, a personal favorite. You want to try it in two different sizes, and maybe two different tops. And I said, hey, Greg, before you go in the fitting room, just give me your credit card. I'll charge you for it. If it doesn't
Right.
fit, you can go to the front. Of course, you wouldn't do that, right? But if you bring in four items into the fitting room and you walk out of that store with two, if you're at a brick and mortar store, they're going to say, this is amazing. Greg,
Hmm.
thanks for purchasing two items. That's awesome. If you do that on an online store, we say, well, that's a 50% return rate. Greg, look, you're dragging down our unit economics. So it's a little bit backwards when you kind of think about it that way. And so I think like that's where we think about the unit economic model a bit more kind of expansively.
That's actually really one of the things I've never compared. So if you think about the brick and mortar retail experience and then the online retail experience, right? Generally, there's a lot of efficiencies in online, right? Which hopefully is going to increase your bottom line. The challenge on the brick and mortar store is that you have to carry all that inventory. So you have to have those sizes. It's constantly getting touched and felt by people. And then when you're done with it after season, then it's on to sale, or then it's on to secondhand, or then it's on to trash, right?
Yeah.
Whereas your online shop can be a lot more nimble. And I don't know that I've ever seen anybody try to create some normalization between those two shopping journeys when it comes to how to create the profit center for that shopping experience. Have you ever seen anything like that where you take into account the inventory, you take into account the secondhand, you take into account like all these things that brick and mortar really struggles with, and look at that from an online experience with the ability to try before you buy, in a sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that the e-commerce is sort of this, I think that might be part of the miss in e-commerce, which is we kind of made it a way to just get things online, like from your living room. You could just like order things, but it's a lot harder to kind of digitize some of the experiences that are tried and true. Um, I think a lot about, and Jeff Bezos has talked about this, right? Like, what are things that will never change? And instead of thinking about like what's going to be new, what's gonna transform an industry, instead of thinking of things that
Mm,
are like never going to change, one thing that's never going to change is that brick and mortar experience. People will always want to experience a product in person before they depart with their money. And they're
right,
also going to
right.
always want some help figuring out what that product is. And so like that's like
The staple of
the
retail, in a
linchpin
sense.
of retail, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh, and I just walked in a store. I was given a speech, and I needed something a little spiffy, and so I go into a rag and bone store down the street, and
Hmm.
and Paige over at Rag and Bone just helped me out. Found that item. I wouldn't have found it on my own. And so when we think about basically our two tools, I definitely view this as like we're converting the living room into the fitting room, but where's that sales associate that's saying, hey, based off of
Right.
your measurements, I think you're a small or a medium or a large. And that's kind of where you come in. And so I think there's, a handful of things that help kind of really bridge the gap between brick and mortar and online, knowing that it will never be
Mhm.
fully bridged.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that's a very interesting way of thinking about it. I mean, when we look at all the reasons why people purchase and then all the reasons why people return products,
Yeah.
you've got your brand, just loyalty, right? You've got your
Yeah.
materials, you've got your colorways, you've got your patterns, and then essentially you have your size and fit for our markets, for apparel, right? And so if you can start like taking away the complexities at every one of those stages, just every one of them, you just create the shopper experience that just goes right through the roof.
Yeah.
Um, and so like I'm actually really excited to see how the tools continue to emerge. Like, we're really capturing size and fit. You guys are capturing trust and loyalty, as well as some other stuff. And there's some other pieces in there that I think are going to continue to come in and help to make that journey really quite valuable for shoppers, where this is that normalization between the retail environment. The only challenge is delay, right? You gotta wait for the shipment in a sense, but
Yeah,
that'll continue to get better.
yeah.
Um, as a CEO, like when you're thinking about the future of the business, where do you guys lean into? Where are the opportunities that you're seeing for TryNow in that sense?
We build product for two stakeholders, merchants and shoppers. So our business is organized kind of around those two dimensions. And so the first dimension is, well, how do we constantly drive more and more value for merchants, right? So the try before you
Mm-hmm.
buy experience is one, but there's a lot more we can build around that try before you buy experience. It's not really a tool or tactic. Try before you buy really becomes a strategy, and it becomes the
Mm-hmm.
axis by which all marketing activities revolve around. So email, SMS, PR, your discount strategy. So it cuts across like every kind of part of your business. Therefore, there's a lot that we can build to infuse that into broader strategy. Like a good example would be Good Life. They're apparel business. A big part of their business is really high quality t-shirts,
Mm-hmm.
and then they have some fashion pieces. And so, first initial use case for Good Life is bringing down customer acquisition costs. But then a big goal of theirs was how do we get those shoppers who acquired through that T-shirt, which was a big part of their business, come back and try more fashion pieces
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
right.
other items, and so be turned into a bigger kind of loyalty play. And so like how can we build into loyalty platforms and email providers and SMS providers to segment audiences correctly in a valuable way and get those shoppers to come back and try a wider set of their products. So that's
Mm.
like one example, but there's a kind of a larger kind of go to market motion and how we can allow our merchants to go to market and use try before you buy more flexibly. Um, so that's on the merchant side, and there's a lot of tech we're building around kind of constantly improving unit economics, encouraging the optimal cart composition that drives the most profitable, successful orders for merchants. The other
Yeah.
piece is the shopper side. Yeah, go for it, Greg.
Yeah. To that end, and we can get into the shopper side shortly after this. But how do you guys think about data in that sense? Is it sort of like because you're collecting a ton of data on these consumers? Does that data sit in your system, and you help the shopper, you help the customer based on insights that you provide? Or are you kind of like the data should be everywhere, and we're going to allow you to access it any which way you want, and then you can the brand can integrate it, or the merchant can integrate it into their other sources, their other tools that they have where they may want to, again, like you said, segment out stuff, right? Let's say I have a list in Klaviyo. I know exactly what I want to do with this. I get a whole bunch of data from TryNow. I'm going to segment my list so I can communicate effectively. How
Yeah,
do you guys think about that?
yeah. So we actually don't collect data that the merchant doesn't have. So we
Mm-hmm.
have access to similar data, right? What they ordered, what they returned. We have a team that draws meaning from those insights from that data, right? So
Mm-hmm.
our data engineer Sherry Lynn says data is meaningless until it becomes meaningful,
Yeah, right.
and it's completely right. So like we're focused on drawing insights from that data to help our merchants optimize and refine the program, right? And I'll give you one
Mm-hmm.
example of that. Like a key metric that we care about is success rate. If a shopper orders one item from a brand to just try it out and see if they like the brand, they're most likely to have lower success rates. But if we can get more products into their home, they're more likely to walk away with a product or multiple products that they love. And therefore, the brand acquired a new customer, shopper's happy, they had this great experience, they're going to come back and repurchase at much higher rates.
Mm-hmm.
But just saying more items is not granular enough. What we tend to
Yeah.
see is more sizes across more styles, right? So let's say you're a denim brand, and you try multiple styles across multiple sizes. You're likely to find the right size, and because you have multiple styles, you're more likely to keep maybe two or even three styles as opposed to only one. And so it
Mm-hmm.
varies for every brand, right? So based off of return data that flows through, we kind of understand and can fine tune some, what that optimal cart composition would be.
Got it. Okay. Very, very cool. Yeah. We're in kind of a unique space because we don't have any PI data, but we're creating like unique data on each user based on the algorithms on the backside, right? So we're constantly trying to figure out, and if we were to just give that to a brand, like they wouldn't really know what to do with it at this juncture.
Yeah.
but they're starting to get really intelligent about how they can use it. And I think a big piece of that is we built out a tremendous insights platform that all of the operating teams can access. And so the questions that come out of that are so rich. So, for example, like a big piece of how WAIR was built is that the brands that we work with really don't clearly understand the body dimensions of their shoppers, right? There's been no tool to really capture this in mass before. And so then if you take this back into product design, you're designing your products, you're designing your pattern blocks and your grade rules, but you don't actually know if that aligns with the people that are buying it.
Yeah.
Same thing on the inventorization side, right? You're basically inventorizing based on last year's purchases or last
Uh-huh.
PO and what sold and what didn't, but you don't actually know who's fitting into that when people hit stock out walls and what would be the right size sampling rate or the right size run ratios. And so with our data, right, we're capturing these body predictions at point of sale. We're associating that with the products that are being purchased on the backside, as well as returned and reviewed. And then we're giving that data to teams where they can say, hey, let's say, for example, this shirt, the armhole on this shirt was designed at some circumferential opening. If we have data suggesting that for your small, your medium, and your large, your armhole opening should be different to better fit that body, then the brand can lean into that, redesign their clothing, and then go back into the next season with a better designed product made to fit their human bodies.
Yeah.
Right. So that stuff is like we're really
Hugely valuable.
scratching the surface on it right now, but it's so freaking cool. Like I'm just
How
so
do you
excited.
collect that data that specific, for instance? Because that's like the specific data is particularly valuable. Is that through kind of survey data, surveys from shoppers?
Yeah. So the way our system works, right, is that you're going to come to a product page, you're going to click on Find My Fit or whatever the brand wants to call it. That's going to launch WAIR. We're going to take you through a 4-question survey. And then as a part of that survey, what makes us really unique is that we have a clear ability to predict the dimensions of that shopper's body from like the neck circumference, bust, hips, thighs, inseam, sleeve length, all sorts of data. The reason we can do that is because we own another brand called Fit3D, and Fit3D is the world's largest 3D body scanning company. And so we've scanned over, there's like 3 million human bodies. And so we asked each one of those consumers that have scanned with us to answer that same quiz that's sitting behind WAIR. And so we have this AI that sits
Yeah,
between
you
them
can
where we
match it together.
it's unbelievable, right? And so when we're doing this, when we first got into it, we were doing a lot of sizing professional services work where we would literally define the size tables for brands. And we're sitting there like, man, this data is so time box. It's very segmental in a sense. You really need it on your shoppers and you need it consistently flowing in. And then your design teams need to lean into this data so they can constantly evolve the products that you're putting out there into the world such that they fit your audience at that time. You change your marketing, you're going to change your body shapes of your audience, right? You don't have a way to track that without us. So that the data is really, really powerful. And so I just, with companies that are, data associated, I think it's really interesting to kind of hear the story about how they think about data in that sense. We're coming up on a little bit of time here, but I do have one other question. And I know I struggle with this in my life, but balance. How do you balance being a founder, CEO, VC-backed startup with life? Like what are some tricks and some frameworks that you think of for that?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing that's been helpful for me is not trying to arrive at balance,
Mm,
and because then I'll always be disappointed because I won't have balance. So I
right.
actually, I for me personally, and I think for our team at TryNow, like, we don't really believe in work-life balance. We believe in work-life harmony, and it sounds fluffy, but if you
Yeah.
actually like, what does that actually mean? Like work-life harmony means like you might take off at 3:30 to go for a run or a yoga class, and you come on, and you do some uh, work afterwards, and maybe a little bit of, after dinner. It's about fitting things around. It's part of why we're a remote culture, because if people have if a spouse gets a job in another location, like we can fit work around like life happenings and
Right.
situations and changes. So that means like I'm kind of always on, but I've found like a way to like to do that in harmony with other things that happen in life.
Yeah.
So that's been, I think, like a helpful reframing. And then for me, the place that always gives me energy is getting out in the mountains and into nature.
Mm,
And so I'm trail running on weekends and skiing and just getting out to clear my head, or kind of think through things. But that to me is like so critical, and a big reason why I live in in an area where I'm able to do that, able to access it, kind of
yeah.
get to a separate space. What about you, Greg?
Well, first and foremost, I love that you said work-life harmony. I was having a Twitter conversation the other day with another founder, and I was talking about my framework for how I think about work and life. And he asked me, "Is that balance or harmony?" I go, "It's harmony, 100%, hands down. There's no such thing as balance, right? Balance is something that's generally quite static, and harmony
Particularly
is
for
something
people like
close."
us.
Yeah, right. And
Yeah,
so I'm just sitting there, and you said work-life harmony. I'm like, man, I was literally having that conversation and believe the exact same way. So, I mean, I think I have, through my career, I've had times where I've worked, I kid you not, probably 16-hour days for about a 5-year stretch when I was with my prior company at Sport Vision. I mean, it was just like unbelievable amounts of work. And I loved every second of it. And at that time in my life, I really enjoyed that, right? It gave
yeah,
me a lot of meaning and a lot of drive. And then as I got a little bit older, got married, had kids, that balance needed to shift. And so again, with balance, it's too static, right? So how can I then make sure that I'm there for my family and then also put in the time that's needed with the startup? And so we just adapted schedules, right? I just realized that there's going to be certain limitations, but I really need to think through what recharges my batteries. And that at the time was basketball, right? I love playing
yeah,
basketball. I'd play like four or 5 days a week. And so I'd make sure that I had my pickup games. I'd make sure I had these things. And then I'd make sure that I was with my kids and my family. And then work really just revolved around that. Um, and now it even changed again, right? Now I coach my kids' soccer teams and I get so much joy out of it, right? Watching
yeah,
them get excited, do great stuff, but go through the struggle of sports.
yeah,
And then being there to sort of like guide that journey is just, I love it. And so at the time when that's happening, that's my priority. At the time when I'm at work, that's my priority. And so that harmony and giving myself the flexibility to say every day is going to be a little bit different is, I think, really what keeps me, frankly, pretty stress free in a sense.
yeah,
Just not, you don't stress about too much stuff because you don't have that many expectations, but
yeah,
really, really just enjoy it.
yeah. Sounds like you're just going all in on all the aspects of your life.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Ben, this has been absolutely amazing, man. It's a pleasure to have you on the pod. I really am excited to work with you and your team.
Yeah,
And I
likewise,
love
Greg.
the vision for what e-commerce is.
Yeah, you too. You too. I'm excited to meet in person. Hopefully in the coming months.
Yeah, yeah. We're talking about an event, so we'll get that on the books. It sounds great.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right,
Okay,
my
Greg.
friend.
Have a good
Thank you
weekend.
so much. You too. Bye bye.